Well, I think this is probably like the third episode that we're kind of talking about relationships, covenant relationships in particular. And I like to start off with this question that I ask myself when I see someone coming my way, coming down the street, coming down the hallway. Am I thinking, oh no, now what's the issue going to be?
Yeah.
Or is there an excitement in my heart, and then I like to compare it to seeing your mom come down the hallway. There's never that feeling like, oh no, now what, because we're married, right? We're in a covenant relationship that there is no, that contention is just not there. It's not allowed to be there. But when there's people that every time you meet them, it's an issue, right? Like I've heard people say that, I've never had a conversation with my leader that wasn't about sorting out some problem in my life. I've never had the encouragement and I would just say that is not a covenant relationship because covenant doesn't have that in it. So when I see, when we see our spouses coming down the hallway or whatever, it's kind of like, hey, how you doing? Like, what's up? What's new? What are we going to do? What do we got to share? And people that are in covenant relationship is the same thing when I meet with Pastor Rich or whatever, or any of our guys, right? I see them coming, like Summit, that famous picture of you and me, right? Like, hey, you're here, You're just so happy to see everybody because you know that there's going to be a building up and there's going to be a mutual encouragement and a mutual, and there's no issues. And I don't know, I actually see covenant as a place of protection against craziness that is accepted. I can remember being in board meetings of different organizations or churches that I've been part of or whatever, and there's all this confrontation and dealing with issues and certain stuff out and putting people in their place. That's not covenant, and it's not healthy. Right. Some people think it is. There's people that think that, you got to have a good argument for your relationship to be healthy. Not true at all.
Because the whole point of being in a relationship is actually to preserve that relationship, right?
Right,
and that's kind of what we talked about last time, is that you're guarding for these relationships. Part of guarding your heart is guarding for these relationships. So that's kind of where we're wanting to go today, is how do we practically keep those relationships protected and keep them safe? And one of the stories that I like from when I was early on married with Matthew, we weren't married that long, and we had one of those massive blow-up fights. I can't even remember what the fight was about, but it ended up with me sleeping in the bedroom by myself and him on the couch in the living room by himself. We hadn't been married that long, and we both felt so terrible. Of course, you don't sleep the whole night. You feel so awful, and so in the morning we sheepishly come out of our spaces and we kind of look at each other and we're like, we don't ever want this to happen again. But the reality is there are going to be disagreements, there is going to be conflict, there's going to be things that we can't sort out. So then we had to have the conversation, well, how do we make sure that we can disagree without damaging each other? So we actually came up with fighting rules. So the rules were, we are not allowed to yell at each other, we're not allowed to raise our voices, we're not allowed to call each other names like stupid, idiot, or anything like that, right? I wasn't allowed to hit him because when I would get angry, I would punch him. And it's like, I can't hit you back, it's not fair. And he wasn't allowed to walk away without saying, I'll be back, right? Because he'd walk away and it would just make my blood boil because I'm like, right? So he just had to say, I'm gonna go calm down, I'll be back in an hour or whatever. And it's amazing because we've been married for 21 years, and those 4 very simple rules, and the integrity that we've both had to adhere to those rules has protected our relationship. We don't have massive blow-up fights, we don't yell at each other and call each other names, whereas in some relationships it's very common. You see people get angry and then afterwards they apologize, but they've already done all of these things that have damaged the relationship, right? So when we're talking about covenant, we're making decisions about how we're going to walk together so that we don't damage each other in the process of moving ahead. Because there are going to be disagreements, there are going to be wounds, there are going to be things that we're going to have to forgive each other over. And if we don't have the skills to keep it together when we're going through those painful times, that's where the breaking happens. Because what we all have to realize is it's my responsibility 100% to not allow this relationship to break. And if everybody in that relationship feels that way, then we're going to make it.
Right.
Because
Yeah.
at the end of the day, the goal is to preserve the relationship for the sake of the purpose. The goal is not to be right. The goal is
Right.
not to be first.
Yeah.
The goal is not to be heard.
Yes.
The goal is to move ahead, keep
So
relationship
important.
for the sake
Yeah.
of the purpose.
Yeah. I think one thing that I've found with speaking on that side of relationships is that people that have always got an issue, or they've always got something, they've got a fight, they always got something to straighten out or whatever, that's the way you see them,
Right.
right? And so when I think about that, okay, well, the way I act is the way other people are going to see me, even later, even if I'm not acting like that
Yeah.
now. They're still going to see me because I've built this picture of myself in their minds and in their hearts that I'm the guy that's always got an issue, or I always got to be right, or I always got to tell them something, or always, put them down or whatever. And so I think it's really, really good for us to understand. I mean, if I do get this a lot, and I know like Pastor Rich has mentioned this a number of times, that he's seen me do things or seen me in situations where I don't blow up and don't get mad, and he's kind of like, wow, how do you do that? And I'm like, well, the thing is, if I do it once, I'm now that guy, right? I don't want to be that
Yeah.
guy, right? And so that helps me kind of keep things. And the truth is, it's like you say, what is really the focus? Is the focus issue over which way the toilet paper hangs, or right?
Yeah.
Or is it our relationship and what
Yeah.
we can build together?
Yeah, and even if the disagreements are something that is more severe than that, for the sake of relationship, you look at Abraham, who is a great example, where he's, in relationship with his own nephew, Lot, and there comes to be a point where there's just too many of them that they can't make space for each other. And I always found it so admirable of Abraham to say, you get to pick the first
Right.
lot,
Right.
the first place that you want to go. And, Lot took the best that he thought and got what he wanted, and then Abraham had to adjust and shift and move on. But for Abraham, it was way more important to keep that relationship with the guy who did not value him
Right.
the same way that he
Yeah.
valued his own nephew, because he understood the principle of being in relationship and being in unity. And when you go through scripture, especially if you're reading Proverbs, there's such a clarity in the Word of God that anything that brings disunity is wicked.
Right.
It's evil. So anything that you do that brings division is an evil thing.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
sometimes it happens so naturally and so comfortably. Just speaking ill of somebody else is bringing division, right?
Yes.
Just airing somebody else's dirty laundry, just saying how you were disappointed in somebody. All of that is an opportunity to bring division. And I think sometimes we don't understand really how important it is, because we don't immediately see the fruits and the effects of what it does. But the second that you have division, God says that where his unity is, that's where he actually commands his blessing.
Yes.
And so if there's even a little crack in our relationships, if there's any, holding back from each other, the command of God to release his blessing is hindered, right? And you see it in relationships with your spouse, and like God says, if before you pray, if you have, offense to somebody, go to your brother, and like you got to ask for forgiveness, because it's not something he's giving us an option in,
Right. Yeah.
You don't get to choose if you're going to be in relationship with the people that he's put you in. You actually have to be in relationship if you want the commandment of the blessing to flow. And so I think at this stage in the game, it's not enough that we learn to get along with each other when we're in the same room.
Right.
God's actually asking us to fix those issues and come into agreement
Right.
and into unity with each other, so that we can move ahead in the right way.
Yeah. And so much of that comes back to attitude.
Yes.
It really is the attitude. It's the picture. It's the way you see other people. There's one principle in the Psalms. I can't remember where it is. It's hard to find. But I think it was David talking, and he was talking about his enemies and how his enemies had mistreated him, and how God was dealing with those enemies. And then David says, and if I start to speak bad of them, now I become the one that God's dealing with. Now I'm the one that God's no longer happy with.
Yeah.
And so when you're talking about, the way we talk about people or whatever, boy, I tell you what, we can put ourselves in a bad light
Yeah.
really quickly.
Yeah.
And that's one of the most difficult things there is to speak well of people. Because there is a lot of people. How do you speak well of a guy like Lot? I mean, he was an idiot. Like he did stupid stuff all the time. He was so selfish. And I mean, that story, Abraham's a covenant man.
Yeah.
Lot was not a covenant man. And that was really the difference. He was selfish.
But the coolest thing about that is Abraham always walked with covenant principles,
That's
regardless of how other people responded to him, right?
Exactly.
And that's the same thing that God actually does to us. He treats us according to his covenant, even if we're like not in it at all, right?
Yes.
So it doesn't matter if other people are disengaged. The key to walking in covenant isn't that they're on the same page as you. The key to walking in covenant is that you're in covenant, period. And
Right. That's absolutely
that's
right.
how
Yeah.
you determine.
Yes. Yeah, and Abraham, I mean, the way he saw things was totally different than the way Lot saw things.
Yeah.
Like you say, Lot's looking over the green valley, he's going to pick that, he's going to move into Sodom, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
He thinks that's where all the good stuff is, right? And Abraham's going to be left with the brambles and the briars. But Abraham could turn the desert into an oasis because he was a covenant man.
Yeah.
And so it didn't bother him. And I think that's one of the things about having relationships that are actually based on love is we see on a different plane. We see on a different level.
Yeah.
We see what God can do in our lives and in the lives of others rather than what I have to wrangle or manipulate or try to make happen, and to trust God with that. And I think, boy, there's a real key when it comes to all relationships is let God be the guy who straightens out things that need to be straightened out.
It's true, because I think sometimes too, even as leaders, we feel like, we need to bring correction, and it's true that God does require of us to hold to his standard and speak his standard into people's lives. But a lot of times we misinterpret that to be, now I got to make sure that it happens.
Right.
Right? Like somehow I got to get involved. I got to maybe manipulate the situation or, do something to make sure that the change happens. And that's not actually our job. And I think the protection that we have to have over our lives is we can speak the word of the Lord into somebody's life, but then it's between them and God. And you can alleviate yourself of the responsibility of feeling like you have to make something happen, right? It wasn't Abraham's job to make sure Lot ended up moving into the right place. It wasn't even Abraham's job to make sure that Lot got out of Sodom and Gomorrah. Lot had the responsibility to carry his nephew, speak to God about it and intercede on his behalf. But in the end, Lot had to make his own decision. And he did leave, but his wife was turned into a pillar of salt. So, I mean, sometimes you do your best for people and they're still going to end up that pillar of salt because they're not ready to change.
That's true.
But you can't carry that. You can't pull them along. You have to, part of being in covenant is trusting God's process and God's role in that situation where you don't have to carry it all, right? You do what God's calling you to do, and then you walk in peace, you walk in blessing, you walk in covenant, and whatever happens, it happens.
Yeah, and then you're walking in, like you say, walking in peace. I'm not striving anymore in my heart.
So there were some things that you had kind of listed down that talked about how we can see covenant working in our relationships. And I think these are very key. It's easy to see them working in the healthy relationships. I just really want to encourage, because every one of us have people that are a little more challenging than others. And to be able to see how these principles, because when we operate in covenant, it actually frees up other people to be healthier too, to be happier too, and to connect with us on a deeper level, So one of the first things that you wrote, covenant removes conflict. And I love that because, like you said, some people feel like there has to be conflict in order to, you have to see how somebody, fights and all of that kind of stuff, but that's not actually reality.
Yeah, that's right.
So what is the reality?
There was a leader one time that came and visited us, and their response was, because of the way we treat people, their response was, Al is so Asian. And I'm like, actually, no, I'm biblical. Because I don't lead people by conflict. Right? We want to lead by encouragement and seeing the value in them, and I think that's a huge one. But the idea of removing the conflict, I mean, and people go, oh, how can you have a relationship without conflict? But again, it's what the covenant does. It preempts the conflict, right? Because we're in conflict, there's nothing that can separate, or we're in covenant, there's nothing that can separate us.
That's right.
And so, and that's what Hebrews says, right? He said, Paul's talking about what a covenant does, and he says that it puts an end to all strife. So once we've made a covenant with each other, there's no more striving against each other because we've already come into agreement. And so the lack of conflict is because we agree on something higher than one little thing that irritates us or whatever, you know. And again, it's that look into something bigger and higher. So the truth is, we don't have to walk in conflict. In covenant, we've already dealt with that. Now, if you've got people that are not in covenant, there's going to be conflict, definitely. And you'll see that. But that's one of the advantages of being a covenant family, is that conflict has already been dealt with.
And it's kind of that idea, too, where, you know, perfect love casts out fears. You have the ability to speak the truth because you know that in speaking the truth, you're not risking getting cut off.
That's right.
That relationship isn't going to be harmed in any way.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of freedom there.
Because you know, if someone's in covenant, they want to hear the truth.
Yeah, that's right.
That's the big difference.
Yeah.
You know, if I'm outside a covenant, like Lot, I want to hear that I'm liked.
Right.
Right, or that I'm important, or that I'm whatever. And it's so self-centered. But in covenant, I want to hear the truth. And I'm thinking about that. I'm thinking about, you know, like my relationship with our leaders, like Pastor Rich or whatever. When I see him coming, I want to know what he's thinking. Because what he's thinking is probably something that's going to help me think better. And what he's got on his heart and on his mind is never been something that comes in conflict, because I want to learn. I want to know. And that's what happens when we see each other coming, is that we know that we're going to make each other better. And so even if there is a difference in opinion, it's not a conflict. It's an opportunity to learn.
That's good.
And that's all I want. I just want to hear, you know, I want to, if we're in covenant, I want to know what you think. Right? I want to know what I can change to be better and do better, and
That's right. That's good. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Covenant removes negative tension. I love that. Because there's a lot of times where you do feel that tension, right? And you're like, walking on eggshells or whatever. But I love it because it's kind of the same principle, but there is no fear. Right? You don't have to hang on to that. How are they going to wound me? How are they going to damage me? Am I going to get the short end of the stick after the end of this conversation? You know? There's just none of that yuckiness that comes from being in competition or feeling like that person could be an enemy instead of, you know, because you feel like you're fighting. Right? That's what it is. You feel like you're fighting.
And I think that comes from a misunderstanding of how relationships work. A lot of times we can have the attitude that if we could be in agreement, then we're in covenant. But it's the other way around. Covenant produces the agreement. Agreement doesn't produce covenant. Covenant is based on love. Right? It's the covenant of love. That's why there's no negative, you know, conflict in there.
And that's why everyone needs to be having their relationship with God totally like, you know, like sealed, and because that's how you end up with cults, right? How do you get a bunch of people to follow some weird random person to do stupid stuff? Because they're in covenant. They're in and they end up in agreement, you know. And so, like, every one of us has a responsibility to keep our relationship with God so alive that we're hearing from His voice, because it would be easy to lead everybody astray if any one of us kind of got off track because we're in agreement. We're in covenant.
It's true.
So we got to make sure that we're hearing from God. We're, you know, strong in the Word, that our relationship with Jesus is alive and active, and we're not living off of, you know, old manna or whatever. We have to have fresh walk with God.
Yes, you can't force agreement.
No, that's right.
So.
Okay, next one. Covenant removes risk. What kind of risk is it removing?
Well, it removes the risk of me being angry with you. It removes the risk of me breaking relationship, the risk of me threatening you. I mean, just think about it in the terms of marriage, right? You've entered into a marriage covenant. There's no more risk of being separated or, right? That's all been taken care of. So that covenant relationship really allows us a freedom to be honest and open. Right? Because we know that if I'm honest and open with my wife or people that are coming, they're not going to be offended. They're going to be, it's going to be something that builds us up. And so, there's no offense that can happen in covenant. You think of offense, what does it do? Pulls people out of covenant.
It does,
right? Pulls them out of relationship.
It does. So. And it often starts with that. I mean, even if you think in the marriage terms, right? That cold shoulder. You walk in the house and you know somebody's not happy with you because they're giving you the cold shoulder, right? When you're in covenant, you don't have that. Because you're not looking to punish the person or you know, they have to guess what's wrong with you, what's going on in your life. You actually have the freedom to just be open and honest, and so it's good. Okay, the next point that you have is covenant removes position.
There's no I'm big and you're little. There's no manipulation or control.
Yeah.
And that's really what it is. When God makes covenant with man, he intentionally puts himself on our level. That's why he called Abraham friend.
Yeah.
Because they came into covenant.
It's
Right? Like
amazing.
how can a man be a friend
Yeah,
of God?
right.
Well, only if God comes down and says, no,
To our
I am
level.
going to make myself a friend of you. I'm going to humble myself here. And so in that case, there's no more big and little. Like God didn't come to Abraham and said, I'm big and you're little and don't you ever forget it. He said,
Yeah.
no, we're friends, we're partners. We entered into a covenant relationship and we're going to accomplish something with this covenant. And I love that idea because it's just in the pride of man to want to be big, bigger than everybody else. And the stuff that comes out of that, putting other people down,
Yeah.
in some sense it lifts you up or whatever. There's none of that in covenant. It's just not there.
Yeah.
There's no hierarchy in covenant,
Yeah.
right? There's no
Yeah.
levels of position.
And I think it also removes the temptation to want to be recognized and praised. And, I think a lot of times in our walk with God, our success becomes limited because people feel like they have to get their just desserts. Like, I did this, I need to be recognized for this, I need approval. God's called every one of us to be successful in the endeavors he's called us to. But with that, if you have the attitude that you have to be recognized, you have to be promoted, you have to be seen, then there's something it hinders your growth because then
Right.
it becomes about who you are and
Yeah.
you're operating out of a spirit of pride. But yeah, when you're in covenant, there's no need for, like, I'm the guy with the biggest church, I'm the guy with the best preaching, I'm the guy with the whatever it is,
Right.
right? It
Yeah.
totally takes all of that.
Yeah.
And then everybody's allowed to succeed. And even if you're not recognized, you still share in the success because your success is my
That's
success
right.
and
Yeah.
vice versa.
That's very good.
There's nothing about it that's you and me. It's
Right.
us
Yeah.
together. It's a
That's
beautiful
really
picture.
good. That's a good one, Beck, because we see that happen, and again, that's why I say covenant is our place of protection, because we've had that happen where people basically, they want to lay claim to things that you've done or whatever, and boy, I tell you what, I would hate to do that.
Yeah.
I would hate to say, something you've done and make a claim that I've done it. Like, it's just
Yeah.
silly, right?
Yeah.
And so it's, because it's not about that. It's
Yeah.
about what we're doing for the kingdom, and so there's a humility there, yeah.
Next one, covenant removes suspicion. I love this.
There's no wondering about the other guy's motives. We're simply impressed by each other.
Yeah, because suspicion isn't something that somebody else brings into the relationship. Suspicion is from the inside out.
Yeah,
it's
right.
from you, right?
Yeah.
And there can be people that are untrustworthy in the sense that they've broken promises before, they've done things or whatever, but that doesn't give you the right to always sit in judgment and have that critical
Right.
attitude about
Right,
them.
yeah.
I think what suspicion does is it shows you just that you haven't learned how to really forgive,
Right.
how to really release, how to
Yeah.
really trust God with it. Being free of suspicion doesn't mean that you don't have healthy boundaries, but I think sometimes we go overboard the other way, right? We
Right.
would rather pre-protect ourselves from something that could possibly happen, and
Yeah.
I think it's a yucky way to live.
Yeah, it is.
Because
Yeah.
then you can't receive any of the goodness of God
Right.
from that other person.
And I find that you're never suspicious of people that you're impressed with,
yeah,
right? And so if I'm impressed with my wife,
Yeah.
I'm never suspicious of her, right? And the same thing in our covenant relationships, and I think that's one of the big things across the Victory Asia platform, is we're always impressed with each other.
yeah,
And excited
Sure.
about what the
Yeah.
other guys are doing, because it's
Yeah.
not taken away, like you say, it's adding to us, right?
Yeah.
Because we're the ones that are doing this. So I think that's really key to think about that. Like, when you see somebody coming, are you impressed with them? And sometimes familiarity, right? That
Yeah.
being impressed can be gone. But I thank God in covenant, and that's what I blame it on the covenant that we are still so very impressed with each other all across the Victory Asia platform,
Yeah.
right? Like the honor,
Yeah.
that was one of the big things at Summit, right? That
Yeah.
guys from the outside came and said, "Man, there's such an honor here. You guys honor each other in such an amazing way." It's not fake honor. It's because we really are impressed with each
Yeah,
other. I am
that's right.
so impressed with, with Ronald and Cynthia and Ralph and Jane and Prem and Alita. And, I'm just so impressed with all of these guys that are doing things. And it is exciting and fun
Yeah.
to
it's
look at
true.
them like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and then you just see the beauty of God and everything that's going
Mm-hmm.
on. It's hard not to be encouraged and then also like stirred up, right?
Right. Yeah.
To do more and to be more. So yeah, I think that's awesome. I think you know, if we do have struggles, especially people that we are in relationship with,
Mm-hmm.
they're working with us side by side. If there's any kind of a critical attitude, a negative perception, anything like that, man, let's just ask God to remove that from
Right.
our hearts and our minds,
Yeah.
right? And just look for the gold in everybody. Look
Mm-hmm.
for, but for the most part, it's easy to do because everybody is actually quite amazing. It's amazing how little conflict we have.
Oh,
But
yeah.
when it does happen, we got to deal with it right away.
Well, and that's the thing, and when I look at, okay, why is that? Because I know other ministries that are full of conflict,
Yeah.
you know, and full of jostling and you know, like trying to get whatever, climb the ladder, whatever. And when I look at that, I say, why is there such a lack of that? Well, it's the covenant, and then the things that make covenant work, like the humility and the honor and the love that we have for people, and
Yeah.
seeing the potential in them rather than the threat that they might be, or
Yes.
whatever. I mean, wouldn't it be terrible to see other people as a threat? Wouldn't it
Yeah.
be terrible to see the church down the road as a threat?
Some people do that though, right?
They
their
do,
their
yeah.
associate pastor is like their,
Yeah,
you know,
I know.
yeah, it's
I
weird,
they
but
go,
it
where does
happens,
that
so,
come from?
yeah.
And so I, you know, all those good things, I blame it on the covenant,
Yeah.
on being in covenant relationship. It's just so powerful and so wonderful. So
So
yeah. Mm-hmm.
we're protected, we're healthy, we're whole,
Yeah.
we're moving ahead.
Yeah, amen. So always be looking for more people to draw into covenant relationship, and you can tell them by their heart and by their love for Jesus, and they really want to do what He wants them to do. If we're all doing what God wants us to do, we are one. There's no division. It's pretty powerful. Amen.